The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for the 100th time that week. 23 years of service had taught him that precision was everything in the Queen's Guard. Every button polished, every movement calculated, every breath measured. The tourists gathered behind the iron gates, cameras ready, waiting for that perfect shot of the stoic guards who never moved, never spoke, never showed emotion. James had perfected the art of stillness. His dark eyes remained fixed ahead, his expression carved from stone. Children pointed at him, adults whispered jokes, and photographers clicked away, but he remained unmoved. This was his duty, his honor, his life. The red uniform wasn't just clothing, it was armor that protected not just the royal family, but the very idea of unwavering dedication. But, on this particular Tuesday morning in November, something felt different. The autumn air carried an unusual heaviness, and James noticed the way the light filtered through the golden leaves seemed softer somehow. He had no way of knowing that 3 miles away, in a small hospital room at Great Ormond Street, a 7-year-old girl named Emma was having the conversation that would change both their lives forever. Emma Collins sat propped up in her hospital bed, her bald head covered by a bright pink beanie that her grandmother had knitted. The chemotherapy had taken her hair months ago, but it couldn't take her spirit. Her large green eyes, made even more prominent by her thin face, sparkled with the kind of determination that surprised even the doctors. Today was supposed to be a good day. Dr. Rahman had promised her that if she felt well enough, they could discuss her wish list. The Make-A-Wish Foundation had contacted the family weeks ago, but Emma had been too sick to think about wishes then. Now, as she felt a tiny bit stronger, the possibilities seemed endless. Her mother, Sarah, sat beside the bed, trying to hide the dark circles under her eyes and the worry that had become her constant companion. "So, sweetheart," said Mrs. Patterson, the kind volunteer from Make-A-Wish, settling into the chair beside Emma's bed. "Tell me, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" Emma's eyes lit up immediately. "I want to meet one of the Queen's Guards." Sarah blinked in surprise. She had expected Emma to ask for a trip to Disney World, or to meet a pop star, or perhaps for some expensive toy. "The Queen's Guards, darling? Are you sure?" Emma nodded vigorously, wincing slightly at the movement but not letting it dampen her enthusiasm. "I've seen them on TV, Mummy. They're so brave and strong. They protect the Queen. I want to be brave like them." She paused, her small hands fidgeting with her blanket. Maybe they could teach me how to be brave." Mrs. Patterson made careful notes, her heart already aching for this little girl who wanted to learn courage from soldiers. "That's a wonderful wish, Emma. Let me see what we can arrange." What Mrs. Patterson didn't tell Emma was that the royal household was notoriously difficult about such requests. The guards were working soldiers, not entertainers. Their duties were sacred, their protocols strict. But she had worked with Make-A-Wish for 12 years, and she had learned that sometimes the impossible just needed the right approach. Meanwhile, back at Buckingham Palace, James was midway through his 2-hour duty shift when he noticed a disturbance near the main gate. A small crowd had gathered, and he could hear raised voices. Through his peripheral vision, guards were trained to see everything without moving their eyes. He spotted a woman in a business suit speaking urgently to one of the palace officials. The conversation was heated but quiet, the kind of discussion that happened when important matters needed to be handled delicately. James couldn't hear the words, but he could sense the tension. Years of military training had made him attuned to such things. Something was happening, something that would likely affect the guard rotations or protocols. After his shift ended, James made his way to the guard quarters, where he was surprised to find Captain Reynolds waiting for him. The captain's usually stern face held an expression James couldn't quite read, not anger, but something close to discomfort. "Mitchell," the captain began without preamble. "We've received an unusual request through official channels. Make-A-Wish Foundation wants to arrange for a terminally ill child to meet with one of the guards." James kept his expression neutral, though his heart gave an unexpected skip. "Yes, sir. The thing is, they're not asking for a quick photo opportunity or a brief meeting. This little girl, she's 7 years old, and she wants to learn about being brave. She specifically requested to meet a Queen's Guard." Captain Reynolds paused, studying James's face. The request has been denied, of course. Protocol doesn't allow for such interactions. We're soldiers, not social workers. Of course, sir, James replied, though something in his chest felt heavy. However, the captain continued, I wanted you to be aware because you'll likely be approached about this. The Foundation is persistent, and they may try to contact individual guards directly. Any such contact should be reported immediately and declined politely but firmly. That evening, James returned to his small flat in Pimlico with the captain's words echoing in his mind. He tried to go through his usual routine: shower, dinner, reviewing military manuals, but he couldn't stop thinking about a 7-year-old girl who wanted to learn about bravery. James had joined the military at 18, fresh out of school with no clear direction in life. His father had been a carpenter, his mother a nurse, and he had always felt caught between their practical approach to life and his own desire for something more meaningful. The army had given him purpose, structure, and, eventually, the highest honor he could imagine, becoming one of the Queen's Guards. He had seen combat in Afghanistan during his early years, before being selected for ceremonial duties. He knew about real bravery, the kind that happened when bullets were flying and friends were dying. But he also understood that sometimes the greatest courage was found in the smallest moments, in the decision to keep going when everything seemed impossible. The next morning brought another letter that would change everything. James found it slipped under his door, written in careful handwriting on hospital letterhead. Someone had gone to great lengths to get this letter to him personally, bypassing all official channels. Dear Guard, it began. My name is Emma, and I am 7 years old. I am in the hospital because I have cancer. The doctors say I might not get better, but I am trying to be brave. I saw you on television, and I think you are the bravest person in the world. I wish I could be brave like you. My mummy says you protect the Queen because she is important. I think that makes you a hero. I don't want to bother you, but I was wondering if you could tell me how to be brave when everything is scary. I promise I won't take much of your time. I hope you are having a good day protecting the Queen. Thank you for being brave for all of us. Love, Emma. P.S. I drew you a picture, but Mummy says it's not very good. I hope you like it anyway. Attached to the letter was a crayon drawing of a figure in a red coat and tall black hat, standing very straight with a big smile. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, Emma had written "My hero." James sat in his kitchen, reading the letter 3 times before the full weight of it hit him. This wasn't just a sick child asking for a celebrity meeting. This was a little girl facing the unimaginable, looking for strength in the only place she could think to find it. And, somehow, she had found a way to reach him directly. He thought about Captain Reynolds's warnings about protocol. He thought about his career, his reputation, his duty to the crown. But, mostly, he thought about a 7-year-old girl who was fighting the battle of her life and had somehow decided that he, a man who stood still and looked stern for tourists, was her idea of a hero. The decision, when it came, felt as natural as breathing. James picked up his phone and dialed the number written at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice cautious and hopeful. Hello, this is Sarah Collins. Mrs. Collins, this is Sergeant James Mitchell. I believe your daughter Emma wrote me a letter. The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats before Sarah's voice returned, thick with emotion. Oh my God. You actually called. I can't believe you actually called. Mrs. Collins, I'd like to arrange to meet Emma, if that's possible. I understand there are official channels that have been difficult. But I think we can find a way to make this happen. As they spoke, James felt something shift inside him. For 23 years, he had followed orders without question, honored protocol above all else, and found meaning in duty and tradition. But, now, for the first time in his military career, he was about to willingly break the rules. And, somehow, it felt like the most important mission of his life. The conversation with Emma's mother lasted nearly an hour. Sarah explained the situation in heartbreaking detail: the diagnosis 6 months ago, the aggressive treatment, the recent news that the cancer was not responding as hoped. She told him about Emma's fascination with the guards, how she had insisted on watching the changing of the guard ceremony on television whenever she felt well enough. "She says you're all so strong and brave," Sarah whispered. "She thinks if she can learn to stand like you do, maybe she can be strong enough to fight the cancer." "I know it sounds silly, but—" "It doesn't sound silly at all," James interrupted gently. "Courage comes in many forms, Mrs. Collins. Your daughter has already shown more bravery than most soldiers I've served with." When the call ended, James sat in his quiet kitchen, Emma's letter spread before him on the table. The crayon drawing smiled up at him, and he realized that this little girl had just taught him something important about what it really meant to serve others. Tomorrow, he would begin planning something that would either end his career or define it in ways he had never imagined. James spent the next 3 days carefully planning what would become the most important unauthorized operation of his military career. He knew that a direct approach would be impossible. The palace gates were monitored, visitors were screened, and his movements were logged. But 23 years in the military had taught him that creative problem-solving was often more valuable than following standard procedures. His first step was recruiting help from someone he trusted completely, his younger brother David, who worked as a paramedic in central London. David had always been the rebel in the family, the one who questioned authority and found ways around seemingly impossible obstacles. More importantly, he had connections throughout London's medical community. "Let me get this straight," David said, sitting across from James in a quiet pub near Victoria Station. "You want to smuggle yourself into a children's hospital to meet with a dying kid, all while risking your career and probably breaking about 50 different military regulations?" "That's an oversimplification, but yes," James replied steadily. David grinned. "I'm in. What do you need?" The plan they developed was elegantly simple. David would arrange for James to visit Great Ormond Street Hospital as part of a community outreach program that didn't officially exist. James would arrive in civilian clothes during his off-duty hours, spend time with Emma, and leave without anyone in the military hierarchy being the wiser. But, as James quickly learned, even the simplest plans could become complicated when they involved a determined 7-year-old and her equally determined family. When James called Sarah Collins to explain the arrangement, she listened carefully before responding in a voice that was both grateful and heartbreakingly honest. "Sergeant Mitchell, I can't tell you what this means to Emma. She's been talking about meeting a guard constantly since I told her you called. But there's something you need to know before you come." Sarah paused, and James could hear her struggling to find the right words. "Emma's condition has worsened since we last spoke. The doctors, they don't think she has very long left. Weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky." The news hit James harder than he had expected. In just a few days, this little girl had become real to him in a way that surprised him. She wasn't just a face in a crowd or a name in a report, she was Emma, who drew pictures of guards with crayons and believed that courage could be learned like a lesson in school. "Mrs. Collins," James said carefully, "is Emma still well enough for a visit?" "She has good days and bad days. Today is a good day. She's been sitting up, talking, even laughing a little. But I need you to understand that she looks different now. The treatment has been very hard on her. I don't want you to be shocked. I've seen many things in my military service, ma'am. Nothing about Emma's appearance would shock me. What matters is her spirit, and, from her letter, I can tell that's stronger than ever." They arranged to meet the following Saturday afternoon. James would come to the hospital at 2 o'clock, when Emma typically had her best energy levels. Sarah would tell Emma that a special friend was coming to visit, but she wouldn't reveal who it was until James actually arrived. The week passed slowly for James. During his guard duties, he found himself thinking about Emma's letter, particularly her question about how to be brave when everything is scary. It occurred to him that in 23 years of military service, no one had ever asked him such a direct question about courage. His training had covered tactical bravery, the kind needed in combat situations, but Emma was asking about something deeper, the everyday courage needed to face an uncertain future with hope instead of fear. He began to research childhood cancer, reading medical websites and support forums late into the night. What he learned both inspired and devastated him. Children like Emma often displayed remarkable resilience, finding joy in small moments and maintaining hope despite overwhelming odds. Parents and families showed superhuman strength, caring for their sick children while managing their own grief and fear. Medical staff worked tirelessly to provide not just treatment, but comfort and dignity to children facing the unthinkable. By Saturday morning, James realized that he wasn't just visiting a sick child, he was entering a world of everyday heroes who had been fighting battles he had never imagined. He arrived at Great Ormond Street Hospital wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, carrying a small bag that contained Emma's letter and drawing, along with something special he had prepared for her. The hospital corridors were bright and cheerful, decorated with colorful murals and artwork, but James could feel the weight of the place, the hope and heartbreak that existed side by side in every room. Sarah Collins met him at the elevator on the 7th floor. She was younger than James had expected, probably in her early 30s, with tired eyes that still held fierce determination. Her handshake was firm, and, when she looked at him, James could see where Emma got her strength. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "I still can't quite believe you're here." "Thank you for making it possible," James replied. "How is she today?" "Excited. I've never seen her so excited about anything. She's been asking every 5 minutes if it's 2 o'clock yet." Sarah's voice softened. "She doesn't know who's coming, but she seems to sense that today is special." They walked down a corridor lined with children's artwork, past rooms where other young patients were receiving treatment or resting with their families. James was struck by the resilience he saw everywhere: children playing games between treatments, parents reading stories with forced cheer, siblings bringing drawings and small gifts. This was a place where ordinary people performed extraordinary acts of love every single day. Before we go in, Sarah stopped outside a door marked with a colorful nameplate reading "Emma's room." "I want you to know that meeting you has already made her so happy. Whatever happens in there, you've already given her something precious." James nodded, understanding that this moment was as much about Sarah's hope as it was about Emma's wish. This mother was watching her child slip away, and she was grasping at anything that might bring her daughter joy in whatever time remained. When they entered the room, James saw Emma sitting up in bed, her green eyes bright with anticipation. The pink beanie covered her head, and she wore pajamas decorated with tiny crowns. She was smaller than he had imagined, her face thin from illness, but her smile was radiant. "Emma, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "your special visitor is here." Emma looked at James with polite curiosity, clearly trying to place why this man in ordinary clothes was considered special. Then, Sarah added quietly, "Emma, this is Sergeant James Mitchell. He's one of the Queen's Guards." The change in Emma's expression was immediate and profound. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened in a perfect circle of surprise, and, for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then, in a voice filled with wonder, she whispered, "You're really him? You're really a Queen's Guard?" "I am indeed," James said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "And you're Emma, the brave young lady who wrote me such a beautiful letter." "You got my letter? Really truly got it?" Emma's excitement was infectious, and James found himself smiling more broadly than he had in months. "I did, and I brought it with me, along with your wonderful drawing. I've been carrying them with me all week." He pulled the letter and picture from his bag, showing them to Emma. "In fact, I was hoping you might be willing to sign your artwork for me. I'd like to frame it and hang it in my quarters." Emma's face flushed with pleasure. "You want to keep my drawing? But it's not very good." "Emma," James said seriously, "it's one of the best pictures anyone has ever drawn of me. You captured something very important, you drew me smiling. Most people think guards never smile, but you understood that we can be happy on the inside, even when we have to look serious on the outside." For the next hour, Emma peppered James with questions about his life as a guard. She wanted to know everything: how heavy was his uniform, did his feet hurt from standing so long, what did he think about while he was on duty, had he ever met the Queen personally? James answered each question thoughtfully, often turning the conversation back to Emma's own experiences and drawing parallels between her daily challenges and his military training. "Being brave isn't about not feeling scared," he explained when Emma asked directly about courage. "It's about feeling scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. You know about that, don't you?" Emma nodded solemnly. The needles scare me, and the medicine makes me sick. But I do it anyway because Mummy says it might help. That's exactly right. That's real courage, the kind that matters most. James leaned forward slightly. Can I tell you a secret? Sometimes, when I'm standing guard and my feet hurt or I'm tired, I think about brave people like you. It helps me remember why my job is important. Emma's eyes grew wide. You think about me? I think about all the people who are fighting their own battles, just like you are. It reminds me that standing guard isn't just about protecting buildings or following rules, it's about protecting people who need protection, including brave little girls in hospitals. The conversation was interrupted when Dr. Rahman entered for Emma's afternoon check. James was surprised when Sarah introduced him openly as Emma's friend from the Queen's Guard. The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded and proceeded with her examination. Emma's having a very good day, Dr. Rahman announced after checking Emma's vital signs and asking about her pain levels. Whatever's put this smile on her face, I prescribe more of it. As the doctor left, Emma turned to James with a request that caught him completely off guard. Sergeant James, would you teach me how to stand like a guard? I want to practice being brave, and I think if I can learn to stand really straight and tall, maybe I'll feel stronger. James glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly despite the tears gathering in her eyes. I think that's an excellent idea, he said. But, first, we need to talk about what it really means to stand like a guard. He helped Emma out of bed, supporting her carefully as she stood on unsteady legs. She was wearing fuzzy pink slippers and leaning heavily on an four-pole, but her determination was unmistakable. The first thing to understand, James said, positioning himself beside her, is that standing guard isn't about being stiff or uncomfortable. It's about being alert and ready. Can you imagine yourself as a protector of something very important? Emma thought for a moment, then said, I could protect Mummy. And maybe my stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts. Perfect. Now, when you're protecting something precious, you want to stand tall and proud, but also comfortable enough to stay alert for a long time. Let's start with your feet. For the next 20 minutes, James taught Emma the basics of a guard stance, modified for a 7-year-old girl with an 4-line and limited strength. He showed her how to distribute her weight, how to keep her shoulders back without straining, how to breathe steadily to maintain focus. Emma practiced with intense concentration, occasionally swaying but always correcting herself. When she managed to stand still for a full minute, she looked up at James with pure triumph. I did it! I stood like a real guard. You absolutely did, James confirmed. In fact, I think you've shown more natural ability than some of the recruits I've trained. As the afternoon wound down, James realized that this visit had become something entirely different from what he had planned. He had come to offer comfort to a sick child, but Emma had taught him something profound about the nature of service and courage. She had reminded him that real bravery wasn't found in grand gestures or public ceremonies, it was found in the daily choice to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep loving in the face of impossible odds. When it came time to leave, Emma had one final request. Sergeant James, next time you're standing guard, would you think about me standing guard too? I'll be here in my room, practicing my stance and protecting Mummy and Mr. Peanuts. I promise, James said solemnly. In fact, I'll think about you every single day I'm on duty. We'll be standing guard together, you and I. As James left the hospital that evening, he carried with him the image of Emma practicing her guard stance, for pole in one hand, stuffed elephant in the other, standing as tall and proud as any soldier he had ever served with. He also carried a growing certainty that this would not be his only visit to room 717. Emma had asked him to teach her about courage, but she had already shown him what true bravery looked like. Now he was determined to show her what it meant to have someone standing guard over her, even when protocols and regulations said he shouldn't. The battle for Emma's life was far from over, and James Mitchell had just enlisted as her personal guardian, whatever the cost to his career might be. The week following James's first visit to Emma passed differently than any week in his 23-year military career. During his guard duties, he found himself thinking not about protocol or procedure, but about a 7-year-old girl practicing her guard stance in a hospital room. When tourists took photographs, he wondered if Emma would see any of them and remember their afternoon together. When children pointed at him from behind the palace gates, he thought about how Emma had looked at him not as a tourist attraction, but as someone who represented the strength she was trying to find within herself. On Thursday, James received a phone call that changed everything. "Sergeant Mitchell?" Sarah's voice was strained, and James immediately knew this wasn't good news. "Emma's taken a turn for the worse. She's been asking for you constantly, but the doctors, they don't think she has much time left." James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Sarah's words settle in his chest. "What can I do?" "This might sound crazy," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "but Emma has this idea. She keeps talking about wanting to stand guard one more time, but she wants to do it properly. She's been asking if you could bring your real uniform so she could see what it actually looks like." James felt his heart skip a beat. Bringing his ceremonial uniform out of the palace, especially to an unauthorized meeting, was a serious breach of protocol that could result in court-martial. The red tunic, the bearskin hat, even the buttons and insignia, everything was property of the crown, meticulously tracked and accounted for. "Sarah," he said carefully, "that would be very complicated. I know I'm asking too much. It's just that she's been so weak, but whenever she talks about seeing a real guard uniform, she gets the spark back in her eyes. The doctors say we might only have a few days left, and I just want to give her anything that might make her happy." James sat in his flat, staring at the wall where he had framed Emma's drawing. The crayon figure in the red coat smiled back at him, and he realized that this moment was exactly what Emma had been trying to capture, the choice between following rules and doing what was right. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. If I do this, if I bring my uniform to the hospital, there's a very good chance I'll lose my position with the Queen's Guard. My entire military career could be over." The silence on the phone stretched for several seconds before Sarah responded, her voice thick with emotion. "James, I can't ask you to do that. I'm sorry I even brought it up. Emma would never want you to get in trouble because of her." But James was thinking about something Emma had said during their first meeting. She had asked him what he thought about while standing guard, and he had told her he thought about protecting people who needed protection. Now, faced with the most important decision of his military career, he realized that protecting Emma's final wish mattered more than protecting his own future. "Sarah, what time should I be there tomorrow?" The next morning, James went through his normal preparation routine, but with significant modifications. He carefully packed his complete ceremonial uniform in a large sports bag, including the red tunic, blue trousers, white gloves, boots, and even the tall bearskin hat that was the most recognizable symbol of the Queen's Guard. Each piece represented years of tradition and honor, and James felt the weight of that history as he folded them carefully. His plan was simple but risky. He would call in sick for his afternoon duty shift, claiming a stomach ailment that would require him to stay home for at least 24 hours. This would give him time to visit Emma without his absence being immediately discovered. By the time anyone realized he wasn't actually sick, he hoped to have the uniform safely returned. As James made his way to Great Ormond Street Hospital, he thought about the conversation he would likely have with Captain Reynolds in the coming days. There would be questions he couldn't answer honestly, accusations he couldn't deny, and consequences he would have to accept. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Emma's determination to learn about courage, and his own commitment to show her what it looked like. The hospital corridor felt different this time. James noticed details he had missed before: the way parents moved with careful exhaustion, how medical staff balanced professional efficiency with gentle compassion, the sound of machines that kept hope alive one breath at a time. When he reached Emma's room, he found Sarah waiting outside with Dr. Rahman. "Sergeant Mitchell," the doctor said quietly, "I'm glad you're here. Emma has been having a difficult few days, but she's been talking about you constantly. I want you to know that your visits have given her something to focus on besides the pain, and that's been incredibly valuable." "How is she today?" James asked, adjusting the weight of the bag on his shoulder. "Weak, but alert. She's excited about seeing you, which is the most energy she's shown in days." Dr. Rahman paused, her professional composure softening slightly. I don't usually get involved in my patients' personal arrangements, but I want you to know that what you're doing for Emma goes far beyond any medical treatment we can provide." When James entered Emma's room, he was shocked by how much she had deteriorated in just 1 week. Her face was pale and drawn, her breathing seemed labored, and she appeared to have lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But when she saw him, her green eyes lit up with unmistakable joy. "Sergeant James! You came back!" Her voice was weaker than before, but her smile was as radiant as ever. "Of course I came back. I promised we would stand guard together, didn't I?" James set his bag down carefully beside her bed. "In fact, I brought something special to show you." Emma's eyes widened as James began unpacking his uniform. First came the red tunic with its pristine gold buttons and elaborate braiding. Emma reached out tentatively to touch the fabric, her small fingers tracing the intricate patterns. "It's so beautiful," she whispered. "And so red. It's even more red than in the pictures." "This is called the state dress tunic," James explained, holding it up for her to see properly. "It's made of wool, and each button has the royal cipher on it. See these gold threads? They're called worsted lace, and they show the rank and regiment of the guard wearing it." Next came the blue trousers with their distinctive red stripe, the white gloves, and the polished black boots. Emma examined each piece with intense fascination, asking questions about everything from how long it took to get dressed to whether the uniform was heavy to wear. But it was the bearskin hat that truly took her breath away. When James lifted the tall black hat from the bag, Emma's mouth fell open in amazement. "It's enormous. How do you see wearing that?" "It takes practice," James admitted with a smile. "The hat is called a bearskin, and it's made from the fur of Canadian black bears. It's part of a tradition that goes back over 200 years. Could I touch it?" Emma asked shyly. "You can do better than that," James said. "Would you like to try it on?" Emma's face lit up with pure delight. James carefully placed the bearskin on her head, and even though it was far too large for her, sitting at an angle that made her look comically small beneath it, she had never appeared more regal. "How do I look?" she asked, trying to peer out from under the hat's brim. "Like the youngest and bravest guard in the history of the regiment," James said honestly. Sarah, who had been quietly taking pictures, wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter wear the iconic hat. For a moment, the hospital room seemed transformed into something magical, a place where little girls could become the heroes they dreamed of being. "Sergeant James," Emma said, her voice muffled slightly by the oversized hat, "would you help me put on the whole uniform? I want to see what it feels like to be a Royal Guard." James glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Together, they carefully dressed Emma in the ceremonial uniform. The tunic hung loosely on her thin frame, the trousers had to be rolled up multiple times, and the boots were comically oversized, but Emma had never looked more proud. "Now," she announced, struggling to stand with James's help, "I want to practice the proper guard stance. The real one, with the real uniform." What followed was the most moving military drill of James's career. Emma, wearing a uniform that represented centuries of British military tradition, practiced standing at attention beside her hospital bed. The four-pole became part of her equipment, the heart monitor's steady beeping became her marching cadence, and her stuffed elephant Mr. Peanuts served as the precious thing she was protecting. James taught her the proper position for her feet, the correct angle for her shoulders, the way to hold her head high while keeping her eyes alert. Emma followed each instruction with absolute determination, occasionally swaying from weakness but never giving up. "Remember," James coached gently, "you're not just standing still. You're actively protecting everything that matters to you. Feel that responsibility in your posture." Emma adjusted her stance, trying to stand taller despite the oversized uniform threatening to overwhelm her small frame. "I'm protecting Mummy, and Mr. Peanuts, and all the other children in the hospital, and you too, Sergeant James." "You're protecting me?" "Yes, because you're my friend, and friends protect each other." For 15 minutes, Emma stood guard in her hospital room, wearing a Queen's Guard uniform and maintaining the proud bearing of a soldier on duty. When she finally needed to sit down, she looked up at James with exhausted satisfaction. "Did I do good? did I stand like a real guard? Emma, James said, his voice thick with emotion, you stood like the bravest guard I've ever seen. In fact, I think you've taught me something important about what it really means to serve others. As James carefully helped Emma out of the uniform and back into her hospital gown, she made a request that surprised him. Sergeant James, when you go back to standing guard at the palace, would you wear the same uniform and remember our day together? That way, every time someone takes a picture of you, they'll be taking a picture of our friendship too. James promised he would, knowing that he would never again put on his ceremonial uniform without thinking of this afternoon. As he repacked the uniform pieces, he realized that they had been transformed by their time with Emma. They were no longer just symbols of duty and tradition, they had become symbols of love, courage, and the willingness to break rules for the right reasons. Before leaving, James sat beside Emma's bed and took her small hand in his. Emma, I want you to know something. Every day for the rest of my career, when I stand guard, I'll remember this afternoon. I'll remember how you looked in that uniform and how,